Welcome to FO Talks. With me is our guru on South American politics, Eric Hertz. He's a consultant based in Peru's capital, Lima. Last time he told us about the elections in Bolivia. Today he will tell us about the elections in Chile. Eric, before we unpack the voting results, can you quickly tell our viewers about Chile and what makes this exceptionally long and narrow country so different?
Yes, that's an interesting question because Chile is really an interesting case. It's a country that has quite a high development grade. It has one of the highest GDP per capita in South America. Only Uruguay has a higher GDP per capita. Um, and it also has some other things that set Chile apart, especially if you compare it with countries that we talked about before, Peru and Bolivia, because it's a country where only 30% of the population works in the informal sector, whereas in Peru and Bolivia it was between 70 and 85%. So most people have either a salary or an income as entrepreneur, and are in the formal sector. I also have the best universities of Spanish-speaking South America. They have quite a good educational system. However, it also, and maybe also saying about the economics, there I would say the country is a little bit similar to the rest of Latin America in the sense that it depends very much on the export of minerals and like foodstuff. So, and then including it is more dependent on one single mineral than any other country in Latin America, namely copper. Chile is the largest copper producer in the world. So that somehow makes it a little bit similar to the other Latin American countries. And what it also makes similar is the fact that the income is very unevenly distributed. Chile has quite a high Gini of 430, which is even higher than in Peru, in Uruguay or Argentina. So it has a little bit of both. And that also determines, I think, a little bit how people think and do in Chile. Because for the outside world, Chile is like an economic miracle with a high, they used to have in the past at least, a high growth rate, better education, better healthcare, etc. But the Chileans themselves, they got used to it, and they somehow think they could and should be doing better, especially since life is very expensive, and they still feel that people with a low income have less opportunities than people with a higher income.
Right. You were telling me before we began this about how things have changed politically in Chile, and it's been really drastic since the 2019 mass protests. Can you tell us more about what happened in 2019?
Yes, in 2019 you had a social upheaval that came quite unexpectedly. At the time, Chile had a conservative center-right president, and people they became very angry because of an increase in costs of public transport, and this triggered a social upheaval not only in Santiago but also in provincial towns and cities, and even in the countryside. And it was joined by students, but also by workers, by unemployed, by poor people, and it appeared that there was quite a lot of frustration in Chilean society. And it seems that they had higher demands from politics.
Hmm.
Maybe politics was a little bit boring, because you had a center left bloc and a center right bloc, and it was always that one of the two was winning. And since 2010, they were even alternating each other. So first you had the center left one with Michelle Bachelet, and then came Mr. Piñera from the center right, and then Bachelet came back, and then Piñera came back, and people thought, well, why I'm voting? Because there is not much difference in the end between the two, and I'm voting, but nothing happens.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think that triggered a kind of frustration and also a kind of polarization. People were looking for more extreme proposals. So on the left, you saw a new kid on the block, which was Gabriel Boric, and he
Hmm.
was the leader, a student leader during the social upheaval. And he became the new president 5 years ago. And at the same time, you saw also that the right was fractioning in different sections, whereby the more, I would say, liberal center-right part became smaller and smaller,
Okay.
whereas a more radical right-wing party became stronger. And this was the party, the Republican Party of this Mr. Kast. We even got lately uh, a guy who was even more extreme or radical, I must say, in his thoughts, Mr. Johannes Kaiser. He founded his own party, although in alliance with the party of Mr. Kast in the congressional elections, but he became his own candidate, to say so, and he is a libertarian, like Millet. He wants to get rid of government as much as possible, and he wants to be very tough on crime. Mm, and so you had a divergence because also on the left, it is one of the more leftist parties
Hmm.
uh, represented by the left-wing candidate, Mrs. Janet Jara. She is a communist, although if you look at her track record as a labor minister, I would say she was the one who was able to execute most of part of the program of the government, like bringing back the working hours from 45 to 40 hours a week and have a base retirement schedule for poor people. And she was only able to do this because she was very good at brokering deals with other parties, and among which the opposition. So we in the outside world, we say she's a communist, and then if we think maybe the worst or not if you are a communist, of course. But in fact, she is quite moderate.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. Does this answer a little bit the question?
Yes, yes, it does. But I want to get back to this election because
Yeah.
you gave us an overview of how things were either center right or center left, and people were getting tired of who they were voting for. And then
Yeah.
now you've got the 2025 presidential election. The first
Uh-huh.
round happened on 16th November, and the results were fascinating.
Yeah.
We've now got two candidates in the running, and the presidential runoff is now on the 14th December.
Hmm.
Can you tell us how these elections of this year were shaped by what happened in 2019? Because people were really upset with how things were going politically in Chile, and they seem to have shown their anger this time.
Yes. And also in a little bit unexpected way. I will come back to that later. The way that 2019 is shaping elections after 2019 is that electors are a little bit on the move. They're
Hmm.
looking for more radical options because they want to see change, and they saw that the center party, center left, center right, did not manage a lot of change. So it depends a little bit on the priorities of the
Hmm.
population if the vote goes right or left. At the moment, priorities seem to be crime rate,
Mm-hmm.
immigration, and unemployment, especially among young voters. So, and those topics are more addressed by the right than by the left. And that is why I think that the vote went right. But it's not that the whole population is right wing or that
Mm-hmm.
there is a big move. You could even say that historically, center left and center right are at a balance. Maybe like 50% of the voters used to be more left hanging and 50% more right hanging. But then it depends on what is a topic that is a priority, whether they vote left or right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there was even another thing that we need to take into account. This time, voting was mandatory.
Right.
And that changed a lot of things because during the last elections, first round vote, less than half of the population was voting. So you are now increasing the voters by two. And who are the ones that are now going to vote? Those are the ones that are much more alienated from politics, that are not interested in politics,
Right.
and that tend to um, to vote for simple solutions that they can understand and that somehow trigger them. And there was a third party, a third candidate, Mr. Parisi,
Mm-hmm.
and he is a populist. Although he says that he was not a communist nor a fascist. That was the way he was trying to distinguish himself. But he also had some very simple solutions, like not paying VAT on medicines, that politicians should lower their incomes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he also used some of the populist tactics of Millet by outcasting politicians, call them a caste. Uh, Helps that Mr. Kast has a name that looks like Kast. That is coincidence. And he is now also like playing difficult to have,
Mm.
to whom his vote will be going. So the guy is now inviting the other two for debates, and he said, "Let us debate, and then I'll let my voters vote through the internet in a referendum who has won the debate." Of course, this is not something that the other two will engage in, but he is very much present in these elections. So people are looking for yeah, for outliers in politics, I would say.
Mm-hmm. That you're absolutely correct that this was the first election in Chile with mandatory voting, and the voter turnout nearly doubled because they had no option. But many analysts are saying that Chile has swung to the right, even though you've given us a picture where that's not entirely the case. So why is global media putting it in this way that Chile is also turning to the right?
Well, because news needs to sell, and you can only sell news if you make things simple.
Hmm.
And so, and indeed, you could say they are turning to the right, but they are now turning to the right. And that
Hmm.
does not mean that they are structurally turning to the right. Because in future, maybe they will have other complaints, like they want a higher income, they want more subsidies, and then they will, of course, vote left.
Mm.
Um, that is something. If you look at it in a more long-term structural way, then you see that it is a little bit more nuanced than that.
Well, Eric, let's talk about the presidential runoff. The second round, I mean, it's on 14th December. It's not too far away. You've named both the candidates, Jose Antonio Cast and Jeanette Hara. Can you tell us a little bit more about both of them, their political leanings, and how different are their visions for Chile's future?
Yes, there is indeed something to choose for the Chileans because Jara is really more like the traditional left in the sense that you need to protect the poor. You need to make it possible for them to get access to higher education, to healthcare. You have to invest in healthcare, education. You have to tax the rich and subsidize the poor. That's more her cup of tea, I would say. Whereas Kast is much more like, yes, we have to create a better environment for private enterprise. We should relax labor laws. We should lower taxes for companies.
Hmm.
That is basically the main difference. But there is also a difference on what is one of the main topics, which is the crime rate and immigration. There, I would say the solutions that Hara is proposing are more technocratic, but politically less profitable. So she says, if you want to address the crime rate, then you need to go after the money and you need to set up intelligence services to do that. And that will take time. It's not something that will bear fruits tomorrow, but it will be more successful than some of the radical measures that Kast is proposing.
Hmm.
The same about migration. She wants to help migrants to adapt to Chilean society. Whereas Kast says, no, we don't want more migrants. I even want to get them out of the country. I will make sure that there will be 2,000 flights to get a lot of these immigrants out of the country, especially if they are illegal, and they should pay for it themselves. A little bit Trumpian, I would say. And he wants to excavate a ditch in the northern border because most of the migrants come through the northern border
Hmm.
uh, because Chile is the most southern country of South America. So, and he wants to have the military and the police involved, etc. And that's quite a distinction. And I can imagine that if the population is seeking for more radical, immediate solutions, they would prefer Kast
Hmm.
over Kara.
Well, let's say that Mr. Cast from the Republican Party does win the presidential race, but that wouldn't mean that he and his party have secured a majority in Congress. There is still a lot of coalition building that he will have to do. But
Yeah,
how will Chile navigate through this? Because ultimately, it looks like the country is staring at political deadlock when it comes to passing laws.
yeah. He can, without doubt, work together with the remains of the party of this Mr. Piñera, um, which is the more center-right party, and
Hmm.
he can even work together with the more radical libertarian, Mr. Kaiser. Um, but together, they will have less than half of the seats in the lower house of Congress, in the
Hmm.
House of Representatives. They will have 76 seats and they need 78 for a majority. And in the Senate, they will only have half of the seats, 25 or 50. So he will need to work together with other parties. And in the House of Representatives, that would be the party of Mr. Parisi, who
Hmm.
will have 14 seats in the House of Representatives. But that is, I think, only good for democracy. The same happened to Mr. Boric. He also did not have a majority in Congress. He needed to work with the more moderate parts of the opposition in order to get things done. The negative side of this is that you cannot get done real big changes so
Right.
that voters get again frustrated and will vote for the other side during the next elections.
Yeah, that could lead to a vicious cycle, and I want to come to that because what we're seeing with voters and their political shift in Chile is not new. We've seen something similar happening across Latin America.
Yeah.
We've seen it in Argentina. We've also seen it now in Bolivia. What do you think is happening? Why such drastic changes politically are happening in the region?
Yes, I think that most of these changes are determined by what is happening inside the country.
Hmm.
I think that they are looking a lot towards what is happening in other countries. Of course, what always happens, politicians make you afraid of Venezuela. They say if you vote for that person, then we will become a Venezuela.
Right.
It's absolutely true. But what is mainly happening is that people react towards situations in their own countries. For instance, Argentina was in a deep crisis, and the ones who were most in power were the Peronists.
Hmm.
So they were made responsible by the voters, and there was a change in government. In Bolivia, we spoke about it last time. There was 20 years of celebrations,
Hmm.
and now there's no money left anymore. There is no petrol in the country anymore, no fuel. So people saw that they needed a change.
Right.
In Chile, it is less radical, even I would say. People are just unsatisfied. They're structurally unsatisfied, and that determines for whom they are voting. So yeah, we have to look at it. For instance, Ecuador is another good example. There we have a right-wing president.
Hmm.
This is also after, I think, almost a decade of a left-wing president who was extremely authoritarian and also brought his country almost to bankruptcy. So if these things happen, then yeah, of course you get a reaction. But it's not necessarily related what is happening between these countries, in my view, at least.
Right. But Eric, very quickly, why do you see more Trump like figures and candidates gaining prominence in not just South America, but in Latin America? Because if you look at El Salvador, you've got Nayib Bukele, you look at Ecuador, you've got Daniel Noboa, Argentina, and now maybe even with Chile. So, why is this Trump style politics becoming so popular in Latin America?
Yeah, and we have to be a little bit careful with this caricature, because, for instance, Milei and Trump are very different.
Mm.
Also in power, because they have Trump has a majority in Congress, whereas Milei has to deal with opposition. Trump wants, um, uh, how do you call it, this tariffs, protection. He wants a
Hmm.
protection economy. Millet is looking for the opposite. He
Right.
wants total freedom of trade. So we have to be a little bit careful with these comparisons, but it is absolutely true. If you look at Bukele, he was even, I would say, somehow he came after the first government of Trump, but
Yes.
in this way, he was already heading ahead of Trump, I would say, um, because he was much more radical than Trump was in his first government. And in El Salvador, people think it seems to work
Mhm.
because their main problem was crime.
Yes.
And the guy now succeeded in getting the crime rate down, and now it's one of the least criminal countries in Latin America, one of the
Yeah.
safest countries in Latin America. So people look at him for results. And for that same reason, by the way, people have voted populist left-wing candidates in the past. I think there is there is a kind of a common frustration in Latin America because it's a reasonably democratic society. It is reasonably wealthy, but there is not much progress. People do not feel that there is progress. They see corruption everywhere. They don't see an increase of wealth. They Poverty has been reduced quite a lot, but it does not reduce any further. So people think we need radical solutions, and that is why they vote many times for populists. And it can be populists of the left, but it can also be populists of the right. And right now we see populists of the right because many populists of the left, to be honest, also messed up with the economy.
Mm.
And if you look at more stable political scenes like Brazil and Uruguay, and also Chile or Costa Rica, there you don't see that phenomenon as much. There you have more stable politics, stable political parties, etc.
Right. Well, Eric, thank you for your wonderful insights on Chile and how the election has shaped up till now. I'll probably have to call you back once the final round is done in December to unpack of how different the election this time was, because it had mandatory voting, so people really came out in numbers, and that has really it's going to shape the future for Chile.
Yeah, indeed, it will. And this is also a consequence of 2019, this mandatory vote.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Eric.
Okay, no, thank you and most welcome.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.